The morning Margaret Hale arrived at the Callaway social was the same morning she decided she would leave early. She had told herself this before stepping into the buckboard, before smoothing the front of her blue dress with both palms, before her aunt had said, with the particular tenderness of someone trying hard not to wound, that she looked fine, just fine. Margaret had learned to hear the difference between fine and beautiful, the way a person learns to hear a drop in temperature before the first frost. It didn't hurt exactly, it had simply become information. The Callaway barn had been strung with lanterns, and the smell of pine resin and beeswax candles reached her before she even stepped through the wide double doors. Women in bright cotton stood in clusters near the refreshment table. Men leaned against the far wall with the studied casualness of people trying to look as if they belonged somewhere they weren't sure they belonged. A fiddle started up somewhere in the back, and the sound moved through the warm air like water finding its level. Margaret took a position near the edge of things. This was a skill she had refined over years, the ability to occupy a room's periphery without appearing to hide. She watched the dancing with genuine appreciation for other people's ease. She did not resent it, she simply did not share it, the way a person can admire a bird's ability to navigate wind without wishing to be a bird. She was 31 years old and had been running her father's homestead alone for 2 years since his passing. She knew how to read soil and weather and the behavior of cattle in the hour before a storm. She did not know how to make herself agreeable to strangers in a lit barn on a Saturday evening, and she had made a quiet peace with this, or she had tried to. The trying, if she was honest, had its own particular weight. Her aunt touched her elbow and mentioned the name of a woman Margaret should meet, and Margaret smiled and nodded and found herself standing beside a water pitcher, alone, 3 minutes later, which was more or less what she had expected. Across the barn, she noticed him because he was also not dancing. She did not think, looking at him, that he was profoundly dull. He was not looking at her. She returned to watching the dancers. The Callaway social had a tradition, informal but understood by everyone present, in which the unmarried men were expected, at some point in the evening, to ask one of the unmarried women to dance. It was not mandatory. It was simply the architecture of the evening, and most people moved through it without needing to think about it. Margaret had been to 4 such socials since her father's death, and had danced exactly twice. Both times with older widowers who were being kind, she understood, and who had not asked again. She was thinking about whether she had left enough water in the trough near the south pasture when she became aware that someone was standing beside her. Not at the refreshment table with her, exactly, but near enough to be intentional. She looked up. The man she had been watching across the barn was now 2 feet away from her, and he was looking at the dancing with the same expression she imagined she wore when looking at it. Not longing, not disapproval, but something closer to the appreciation of a phenomenon one has accepted as belonging to other people. She noticed, because she had learned to notice small things, that his hands were clasped behind his back in a way that suggested he was not entirely certain what to do with them. He said, without turning to look at her, "The Callaway boy's going to catch that lantern with his elbow if he keeps at it." Margaret looked. The youngest Callaway's son was dancing with considerable enthusiasm near a low-hanging lantern. She said, "He's done it before. Nothing caught." The man turned and looked at her then. It was not a quick glance. It was the look of someone recalibrating a small assumption, and she found, to her mild surprise, that it did not make her want to step back. He said, "You've been to these before?" "A few," he nodded, as if this were information he would file carefully. He did not follow it with the usual social machinery, the pivot to asking about her family, her land, whether she was enjoying the evening. He simply stood beside her, and the silence was not uncomfortable. This was unusual enough that she noted it. His name, he told her when the fiddle paused, was Eli Voss. She told him hers. He said he thought he knew her father's land. The eastern fence line of it ran close to the Miller property, and he had ridden that way once looking for strayed cattle. She said yes, the fence needed work on the eastern side, she knew. He said he hadn't meant it as a criticism. She said she knew that too. He asked her if she'd like to dance. The question arrived so plainly, with so little preamble or performance, that for a moment she thought she had misheard it. She looked at him. He was watching her with that same steady patience, and there was something in his expression that was not quite confidence. It was something more like determination that had decided to look like calm. She said, "I'm not a good dancer." He said, "Neither am I." She almost said no. She had the no ready, the polite one, the one she had used before and would use again without great suffering. But something in the plainness of his offer, the complete absence of flattery or strategy, made her hesitate long enough that the moment for the polite no passed, and she said yes instead, and then they were on the floor together. He danced the way he had promised, without particular grace, but with a kind of careful attention that meant he did not step on her feet and did not let her feel lost. His hand at her back was light, not tentative exactly, but measured, as if he was aware of the difference between holding on and holding. She did not know what to do with this awareness, so she did not do anything with it. She watched the fiddle player over his shoulder and let herself be moved in something approximating a waltz, and when it was over she thanked him and he thanked her, and they stood for a moment on the edge of the floor without speaking. 3 days later he rode to her fence line. He said he was checking the eastern pasture, which was plausible. He said he thought her fence posts on the northeast corner were leaning, which was true. She had known about it and had not yet gotten to it. He offered to help set them if she had the tools, and she did. They spent 2 hours in the August heat resetting 3 posts in a companionable near silence that was interrupted only by the practical language of the work. Hand me that, hold here, pull back on the wire. She distrusted this. She distrusted it the way she distrusted late-season warmth, which always meant something else was coming. He came back the following week, and the week after that, not always with an errand, sometimes with something small, a piece of information about the Johnson property selling, a question about her well depth compared to his because he was thinking of drilling a second one. The visits were short, and they were never quite purely social, which somehow made them easier to accept than a purely social visit would have been. She could receive him as a neighbor conducting neighbor's business. She did not have to know what else he was. She began to notice that he listened to her differently than most people listened to her. When she said something he did not agree with, he paused before speaking, as if he was actually considering what she'd said, rather than waiting for her to finish so he could say what he'd already decided. This was rarer than it should have been, and she found herself saying more because of it, testing the radius of the thing slightly, seeing how much room there was. He had opinions about land management that she found interesting and sometimes wrong, and she told him so, and he appeared to find this not just acceptable, but something closer to welcome. This, too, she filed away without knowing yet what to make of it. It was on the 4th or 5th visit, when they were sitting on her porch with the sun going west and the light turning the color of old brass, that she asked him directly. She said, "Why do you come here?" She told herself, later, that he was lonely, that the Voss land was beautiful and productive, and that he ran it alone, and that lonely men sometimes attach themselves to available women not out of desire, but out of the particular desperation of silence. She was available in the way that unclaimed land is available, not because it is beautiful, but because no one has yet found a use for it. This explanation made sense to her. It was coherent, and it required nothing of her that she wasn't prepared to give. She held on to this explanation through September and into the early weeks of October.
On the ride back, she said carefully, "You know what people will think." He said, "What will they think?" She said, "That you're taking on a project." He was quiet for long enough that she heard the horse's hooves on the dry ground and the shift of her saddle and her own breath. Then he said, "Is that what you think?" She said, "I think it's what makes sense." He said, "I don't find it useful to do things that only make sense."
She looked at him. He was watching the trail ahead, and his jaw was set in a way she had come to understand meant he was not angry, but that he was holding something carefully. She said nothing more. They rode the rest of the way in silence, but it was not the silence of an argument. It was the silence of two people carrying something without having yet agreed on where to put it. The next time he came, she was short with him. Not cruel, she did not have cruelty in the register she used for people she respected, but she was briefer than usual and did not invite him to sit. He noticed. She could see that he noticed because he paused at the top of her porch steps for just a moment with a quality of stillness that was almost a question. He did not ask the question aloud. He touched the brim of his hat and said he'd let her get on, and he left. He did not come back for 2 weeks. At the end of the second week, she rode north. She told herself she was checking the fence line on the pasture that bordered his property. This was also true. She checked the fence line, and then she kept riding. His house was a good structure, not large, but built with the same careful attention she had noticed in everything he did, the logs squared and the roof sound, and a kitchen garden on the south side that surprised her. She had not thought of him as someone who kept a kitchen garden. She noted this detail and tucked it somewhere. She had not known he had done this. She sat with that for a moment, and then she dismounted, and he took her horse's bridle without being asked, and they walked toward the house. And she felt, in the walking, that some argument she had been having with herself for 2 months had concluded without a verdict, which was its own kind of conclusion. He made coffee. She sat at his kitchen table, which was plain wood and absolutely clean, and she looked at the kitchen garden through the window, and she said, without having planned to, "I thought you came to me out of pity." She said, "I don't know how to do this either." He said, "I know that too." She said, "That doesn't trouble you?" He said, "No." She looked at him and he looked at her, and the thing that was in the room between them was not small and it was not simple, and neither of them moved toward it quickly, because neither of them was the kind of person who moved toward important things quickly. But it was there. It had been there for some time, she thought. She had just been too busy looking for the pity in it to see what was actually present.
He said, "Come back when you want to." She said, "I will." He said, "I'll fix whatever fence needs fixing in the meantime." She looked at him from the height of the saddle. She said, "You don't have to do that." He said, "I want to." She held his gaze for a moment, and the light was going gold and western, and his face in that light was open in a way she had not seen it be open before. And she understood suddenly that he was afraid too, not of the same things she was afraid of, but of his own version of them, the fear of reaching and finding nothing there, of wanting and being insufficient to the wanting. She saw it clearly, not because he had hidden it poorly, but because she had not been looking for it before. She had been too focused on her own unworthiness to look for his.
Something in her chest moved, like a window being lifted in a closed room. She said quietly, "Thank you for the fence posts." He said, "Thank you for coming back." She rode home through the gold and cooling afternoon and did not try to explain it to herself for once. She let it be what it was, which was something she did not have a word for yet, but which did not require a word. It required only the space to exist, which she found she was, slowly and with great care, beginning to give it. In November, he asked if she would spend Christmas with him and his neighbor's family, who invited him every year, he said, and he had never had cause to bring anyone, and he thought maybe this year he would like to have cause.
He said this, looking at the middle distance in the way he had when he was saying something he had prepared and was still not sure of. She watched the way his hands, behind his back, clasped and unclasped once, and she thought of that first night in the Callaway barn when she had noticed the same thing.
She thought, looking at him in that light, that she had spent a very long time waiting to be chosen for the right reasons, and had spent most of that time not believing such reasons existed, not for her. She had understood herself to be the kind of person that certain kindnesses would bypass, that the gentler possibilities reserved themselves for women who occupied rooms differently than she did, who laughed at the right moments and wore their longing more lightly, and did not stand at the edges of lit barns practicing the art of leaving early. She had not expected him. She had not expected that the first person to look at her with that particular quality of attention, patient, uncalculating, and real, would also be someone who was afraid, someone who clasped his hands behind his back in a lit barn and watched the dancing from a distance and fixed fence posts in the August heat without asking to be thanked. Someone who grew lavender he had not mentioned and listened as if what she said might actually change his mind. She had not expected that being chosen would feel less like rescue and more like recognition, like being seen clearly, in ordinary light, by someone who had looked at the ordinary light and found it sufficient.
The wind moved through the yard. He turned his collar up. She looked at the line of mountains to the west, already holding the first serious snow of the season in their upper reaches, and thought that the south pasture was ready for it, and the fence was sound, and there was enough wood stacked on the north side of the barn, and she was standing in her own yard in the company of a man who had asked her, plainly and without theater, to spend Christmas with him. She was, she thought. She was enough. He was still watching her, and when she turned back to look at him, he did not look away, and she did not look away either. And the thing in his expression was warm and steady and entirely without condition. And she let it reach her, all the way, for the first time.